Okay, imagine this. You're out with a friend, right? And you see someone you think is like totally stunning.
Mm,
And you kind of nudge your friend, like, hey, check that person out. And they're just like, not really.
yeah,
It's happened to all of us, hasn't it? It just makes you wonder, like, what makes one person attractive to one person and not at all to someone else.
totally.
So we're going to try to figure that out today. We're diving deep into attraction. What makes us attracted to other people?
It's a big question.
It is. And you know what we're looking at for this deep dive? A Reddit thread.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and explain, like, I'm five thread
Okay.
where they're debating, like, what makes someone hot, basically.
I like it. ELI 5s, those threads are always so interesting because it really does show how many layers there are to something like attraction.
Yeah.
It's not just about physical appearance. It's evolutionary biology, it's culture, it's personal
Well, that's
experiences.
everything goes into
It's a
it.
whole mix.
Yeah. And, speaking of, like, surprising things about attraction, one commenter said that pale skin used to be, like, the ultimate sign of beauty
Oh, really?
because it meant you were wealthy enough to not have to work outside.
Ah, that makes sense.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah, it shows how societal values become intertwined with what we find attractive.
Totally.
It's like if a culture prizes something like wealth or leisure, then the physical traits associated with those things also become desirable.
So it's like the definition of beauty is always in flux then, right? Because if it was tied to something like that, then it would change.
Right, exactly.
Well, and someone else brought up how, like, in some African tribes, breasts aren't sexualized at all,
Hmm,
but thighs are considered super attractive.
right.
Like, what? It makes you wonder how much of it is cultural.
Absolutely. That's cultural relativity in
Yeah.
action. It really begs the question of, are we born with these standards of beauty, or are they something we learn from our environment?
Yeah, it really makes you think, like, is it nature? Is it nurture? Is it a gut feeling? Or a language we pick up as we grow up?
Yeah, and there's probably a bit of both, to be honest.
Probably is, but we can't ignore biology, can we? I
And of
mean,
course not. Evolution has definitely played a role in shaping what we find attractive.
Hmm.
Things like facial symmetry, clear skin, certain body proportions. These are often seen as universally attractive.
Yeah.
And there's a reason for that. They can indicate good health and fertility, which are super important from an evolutionary standpoint.
Yeah, it makes sense would be drawn to traits that signal a healthy potential mate.
Exactly.
But then you've got this whole Barbie effect, right?
Hmm.
And another commenter brought up how media and pop culture can totally warp our perception of beauty.
Yeah, that's a huge factor. And
Mm.
it raises a really important question. How much of what we find attractive is truly our own preference versus what we've been conditioned to find appealing through media exposure?
Right. It's like, do we even know anymore? Are we just absorbing all these images from movies and magazines and social media and then thinking those are our standards?
Yeah, it's like a cycle. The media reflects our desires, but then it also shapes them.
And then we think that's what we want.
Exactly.
But okay, so we've been talking about physical attraction, but what about the kind of attraction that goes deeper than just looks?
Right.
Like romantic attraction?
Yeah, that's a different kind of attraction altogether.
Are they the same thing?
Not really. I'd say sexual attraction is often very immediate. It's that initial spark you feel based on visual cues.
Okay.
Romantic attraction, on the other hand, involves personality, shared values,
Yeah.
a genuine emotional connection.
So it's more about the connection than just the physical.
Exactly, and it usually develops over time.
That makes sense. Well, speaking of different things that attract us to different people, one commenter was joking about starting a website called Breasts of the West
What?
to highlight how different features are perceived in various cultures.
Okay,
It was meant to be funny, but it kind of points out how diverse people's preferences really are.
it does. And that diversity is important to acknowledge. While we've talked about cultural influences and personal experiences, there could be underlying biological factors at play as well. Have you ever heard of the golden ratio?
Is that like a mathematical formula for beauty?
In a way, yes. It suggests that certain proportions are inherently aesthetically pleasing.
Interesting.
And when applied to faces, it seems to highlight features we naturally find attractive.
Really?
Possibly because it ties back to our evolutionary preference for symmetry and balance.
So there's science behind it.
There could be, yeah.
Wow, I never thought about it that way. So
Yeah.
even though there's no one-size-fits-all answer to what makes us attracted to other people, it seems like it's this super complicated mix of nature and nurture, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. We might be wired to find certain traits appealing, But how those preferences actually play out is hugely impacted by our environment and personal experiences.
So it's both.
Yeah, it's a combination of factors.
Wow.
Yeah, it's like we've got this blueprint for attraction, but everyone's blueprint's a little bit different.
So, like, we all have a favorite color, right?
Mm-hmm.
But there are so many shades and variations within that color.
Exactly. And some people are drawn to like bold, bright colors,
Yeah.
while others prefer something softer and more muted.
And who's to say what's better?
Yeah,
Right. Beauty really is in the eye of the beholder.
totally. It's subjective.
Yeah, it totally is. But that doesn't mean we can't try to figure out why we're attracted to certain people.
Right. It's a fascinating question.
Yeah. And someone in the thread brought up something really interesting.
Okay, what's that?
How our early experiences can, like, subconsciously shape what we find attractive.
Hmm.
Like they said, if you had a really kind blonde teacher when you were little,
Uh-huh.
you might be subconsciously drawn to blonde women later in life.
Oh, wow. So it's like making those positive associations.
Why
Like
not?
our brains are wired to connect things. If we have a pleasant experience with someone who has certain physical traits,
Yeah.
we might unconsciously link those traits with positive feelings.
So it's not just about the physical traits themselves, but also about the emotions we associate with them.
Exactly. Those associations can be so subtle, we might not even realize they're influencing our choices.
Wow, that's kind of trippy, isn't it? Like we think we're making these conscious decisions,
Right.
but really there's all this subconscious stuff going on.
Uh-huh. But then you have the whole opposites attract thing, too.
Yeah, like why are some people drawn to partners who are totally different from them?
Well, from an evolutionary perspective, genetic diversity is crucial for survival.
So maybe we're subconsciously drawn to people with different traits so that our offspring will have a better chance of survival.
That's one theory, but we also can't discount the role of personality and individual experiences.
Mm-hmm.
Some people just love the challenge of being with someone who's different from them.
Yeah, I can see that. And then you have those couples who are like so alike. They
Right.
seem like they were made for each other.
And that just goes to show that there's no one-size-fits-all answer to the question of attraction. There's a whole spectrum of human experiences and preferences.
It's so complex.
It really is.
Well, one thing that I thought was really thought-provoking was someone saying that media and advertising don't just reflect our desires,
Yeah,
but they actually create them.
that's a powerful concept.
It is right.
It's hard to deny because we're exposed to these images of ideal beauty from such a young age.
Yeah.
And those images can seep into our subconscious even if they're totally unrealistic.
It's true, and I think that leads to a lot of insecurity and pressure to conform to these standards that most of us can never achieve.
Absolutely. It's so important to be critical of the media we consume and to recognize how these images are constructed.
Yeah, like we need to learn to filter out all the noise and figure out what we truly find attractive.
Right, but even our own instincts are shaped by our experiences, so it's a constant back and forth.
Oh, for sure, for sure. Well, speaking of shaving our perceptions of attractiveness,
Mhm.
someone brought up how exposure to pornography can affect what people find attractive.
Oh yeah, especially for men.
Right, it was kind of a joke, but there's probably some truth to it, don't you think?
I mean, it's possible. Pornography often presents a very distorted view of sex and bodies, and repeated exposure to those images could potentially desensitize viewers to certain stimuli.
So it's not just about what we're attracted to, but also how our perceptions of attraction are being shaped by the media we consume,
Exactly. We need to be aware of these influences and how they might be affecting us.
both individually and as a society.
Right. It's like reclaiming ownership of our own desires.
Yeah, and deciding what beauty really means to us.
Absolutely embracing the diversity of human attraction in all its forms.
I don't know. It's just so interesting to think about, like, we're all walking around with these internal blueprints for attraction that have been shaped by so many different things.
Right. And those blueprints aren't set in stone. They're constantly evolving as we grow and have new experiences.
Yeah, like our tastes change over time.
Exact. Like, think about developing a taste for a certain kind of music or food.
Mm-hmm.
You start with these simple preferences.
Right.
But over time, those preferences become more complex and nuanced.
That's a really good point. So, like, where do we go from here? Like, how can we use this knowledge about attraction to understand ourselves and our relationships better?
I think the biggest takeaway is just recognizing that attraction is so multifaceted. There's no single reason why we find certain people appealing. It's this combination of our biology, the culture we live in, and our own unique experiences.
Right.
And by acknowledging that complexity, I think we can be more understanding and compassionate, both towards our own preferences and the preferences of others.
Yeah, it's like we're all navigating this world with our own little maps of attraction,
I love that analogy.
shaped by our individual journeys. And instead of judging those maps as right or wrong,
Right.
we can just appreciate them for the diversity they represent.
Absolutely. Each map reflects a unique set of experiences and perspectives.
Right. So the next time we find ourselves wondering why we're attracted to someone or why someone else is attracted to someone we might not understand,
Hmm.
maybe we can try to approach it with a sense of curiosity instead of judgment.
I love that approach because ultimately attraction is such a fundamental part of being human. It's what drives us to connect, to create, to build relationships.
Yeah.
And the more we understand it, the more we can appreciate its power and its beauty.
So to wrap things up, I want to leave our listeners with a little challenge.
Okay, I like it.
Next time you find yourself drawn to someone, take a minute to really think about why.
Hmm.
What is it about them that sparks your interest? Is it physical? Is it their personality, their energy, or maybe it's something else entirely?
Yeah, that's a fantastic challenge.
Hmm.
By exploring those questions, we can gain some really valuable insights into our own values and desires. Who knows, we might even surprise ourselves with what we discover.
I think so too. Well, that's all the time we have for today's deep dive into attraction.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for joining us, and thanks to all of you for listening.